You're a software engineer, right? You know how to build and debug these incredibly complex systems. But you also know that painful feeling of walking into a technical interview, a place where all that brilliance can feel like it just vanishes into thin air. So let's break down why that happens and, more importantly, what you can do about it.
I mean, it's gotta be one of the most frustrating things in this industry. You spend weeks, maybe months preparing, you know your stuff cold, but then under the spotlight of the interview, it all just seems to fall apart. And it feels awful, like you failed. But the truth? It's usually way more complicated than that. Seriously, what if the failure isn't in your skills, but in the system that's being used to measure them? This is a huge perspective shift, and honestly, it's the key to taking back control. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to borrow a concept from a field that knows a thing or two about super weird, complex systems, and that's quantum mechanics. This is where we find, believe it or not, a perfect metaphor for what's happening in that interview room. So in the quantum world, the very act of looking at a tiny particle, of measuring it, literally changes how it behaves. It doesn't act the same way it would if you weren't looking. Sound familiar? Well, it turns out this principle holds true for people, too. And look, the parallel here is it's kind of uncanny. In a quantum system, observation changes a particle's behavior. In an interview, the pressure of being watched, judged, and evaluated does the exact same thing to your performance. You're no longer in your natural state of flow. You're in this high-pressure, totally artificial environment. So this observer effect in the hiring world, it creates this glitch, this error in the system. And that error has a specific name. Understanding it is the very first step to beating it. Here's the bottom line on what this really means. A false negative is not about you being unqualified. It's about the interview process being a flawed, broken tool for measuring your true potential. You got to think of it as a system error, not a user error. The bug is in the process, not in you. And look at all the things that are totally out of your hands. You're up against this crazy stress, maybe a poorly designed or irrelevant interview question. Or you could get an interviewer who's just inexperienced or having a bad day. Any one of these things can create so much noise that the signal, your actual talent, just gets completely lost. All right, so how do you know? How can you tell if that rejection was legit or if you were just the victim of one of these systemic false negatives? Well, we gotta look at the data. Here are some big clues. First, are you consistently getting to the final round? If so, your tech skills are obviously not the problem. Something's happening at that final high-pressure hurdle. Another sign? You walk out of an interview just feeling off. You were prepped, you were ready, but the whole thing felt disorganized or weird. That's a huge red flag that the process was flawed, not your performance. Okay, so once you start seeing the interview for what it is, a flawed system, you can stop blaming yourself and start playing the game. So let's get into the toolkit. These are the actual practical strategies you can use to navigate this environment and, well, to collapse that wave function in your favor. All right, here's your 5-point action plan. Number 1, simulate the observation. That means mock interviews, lots of them. Get so used to being watched that it just loses its power over you. 2, reframe the interviewer. Don't see them as your enemy, see them as a future colleague. Turn the interview into a collaborative problem-solving session. 3, structure your data payload. You need a clear framework like the STAR method to make sure your wins are heard. 4, shift the gravitational pull. Make it about them. Frame your skills as the solution to their problems. Show them how you make their life easier. And number 5, super important, extract the telemetry. Always, always ask for feedback. This isn't just for closure, it's data collection for your next attempt. So, speaking of structuring your answers, the STAR method is your best friend here. It's a simple way to package your experience into a story that actually makes sense. You lay out the situation, the task you were given, the specific action you took, and, crucially, the result you achieved. This makes sure your accomplishments land loud and clear with no data loss. Okay, now let's get into something a little more advanced. What happens when the problem isn't that they think you're not skilled enough, but that they might think you're too skilled? Yeah, I know how that sounds. It's a really counterintuitive idea. We all want to believe it's a pure meritocracy, but human dynamics are complicated. If you're really, really good, you can sometimes accidentally make an interviewer feel insecure or stagnant in their own career, and that can trigger a defensive rejection. So how do you handle that? The solution is something called the fiction protocol. And it's basically about using your social intelligence, your ability to read the room. If you start to sense that defensiveness, you shift gears. You stop trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room and instead make them feel like a brilliant collaborator in solving a problem together. Okay, let's pull all of this together with the final and honestly, the most important point of all. It's time to fundamentally change how you view this entire process. It is not a test of your worth as an engineer.
You really need to let this sink in. A rejection isn't a verdict, it's a data point. It often says way more about the company's flawed process, its internal noise, or just a simple mismatch of needs than it ever does about your capabilities. Your job isn't to be perfect, it's to keep observing, keep iterating, and find the system where your signal finally gets through.
So the next time you walk into that room, don't just be the subject being measured. Be the quantum engineer. Be the observer. Analyze the system, manipulate the variables, and remember that you are the constant in this equation.